You were talking about to prevent the military spillover in the region. My question to Professor Dr. Mustafa AYDIN is, from your perspective, is this, let me say, containment strategy enough for Turkey, or which is your perspective from this country?
Okay, thank you very much. The short answer is no, it's not enough. The long answer, let me try to give. When we're talking about the southern front in today's world, we are meaning something different than 20 years ago. During the good old days of the Cold War, when we talked about southern flank of NATO, we meant Turkey and Greece against Soviet Union. That was very simple. It was north of Turkey and Greece. Today, when we talk about southern flank, we are talking about the territory starting from Gibraltar to going all the way to Afghanistan. It's not only NATO territory, it's also partners territory. It involves NATO Mediterranean Dialogue countries. It involves Istanbul Cooperation Initiative countries. So the Gulf region is also part of the southern flank. So when we are talking southern flank today and the threats and challenges in southern flank, actually we are talking a very diverse region and so many problems. Some of them are related to each other and others not related to anything else and kind of unique for this region. So let me throw the net a little bit wider and see what kind of problems actually we are facing in the southern flank. It's not only Syria and it's not only Islamic State. It's wider than that. When I look at NATO in general, let me start from that. 2014 was, I think, kind of an annus horribilis for transatlantic security and NATO. In 2014, we faced two big challenges, two important challenges, and I believe NATO has so far have not adequately developed responses to either of them. One is beyond the topic, beyond this panel's interest. It's that Russia invaded and occupied Crimea, part of Ukraine, and it's still there. It's annexed it against all international rules and regulations and laws. And NATO countries have not been able to develop an adequate response to that. And ministers, no doubt, are going to discuss that again here. In the south, we have seen the emergence of ISIS, or Islamic State in short, in Syria and Iraq, which also created a new kind of a challenge to NATO and NATO countries. We are talking today hybrid threats to NATO because of Russia, what it's doing in Ukraine, and because of ISIS, what it's doing in the south. But at the same time, when we are facing this new kind of threats, in the previous panel, we also heard this number of times, there has been defense budget cuts in number of member countries, despite the fact that in Wales, they all promised to spend more, and they all promised to spend intelligently, not only more, but intelligently. And this is not happening. So this is, and NATO is still heavily relying on the US for critical military capabilities, such as surveillance, in fighting, fueling, transportation, in long haul, and etc. So these are some of the problems that NATO itself is facing. But outside the NATO, and coming to the southern flank, we are facing what some academics call non-traditional security threats. It's a nice wording, non-traditional security threats. It's not traditional in the sense that the threat is not coming directly from some states. And non-state actors are involved, and it's not conventional in terms of conventional military threat. It's different kind of a threat. It includes terrorism. It includes proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. It includes militarization of certain regions. It includes usage of social media, internet, everything. And it also includes conventional military resources. And all this is actually partly converging in wider Middle East, in an area of what we might call wider Middle East, and Eastern Mediterranean. Or in the ancient times, in the history, up until 20th century, it was called Levant. The area that called Levant is now getting increasing attention from all sorts of people. Not only ISIS, which I will come back, but increasingly we are seeing also the traditional kind of threats focusing in the Eastern Mediterranean. There has been talk of new energy resources, natural gas that to be found offshore in Israel, Cyprus, and Egypt. But instead of bringing a unity, instead of bringing collaboration and cooperation among the countries in the region, it had brought more challenges and competition. And alongside with that, we have seen the increase in the Navy presence in the Eastern Mediterranean. In addition to the rivalry between NATO and Russian navies, when I say NATO, it's mainly US, but all the other NATO countries are also involved. So in addition to the rivalry between NATO countries and Russia in the Eastern Mediterranean, we have seen the increase of naval presence in the region from Turkey, from Cyprus, Greece, Israel, and some other countries. So there are so many ships in this small part of the world. And it has become a crowded region. So this is also a problem I think NATO has to look into it. It includes NATO countries, it includes partner countries, how to manage them, how to allow them to go around and exercise their rights to be there without confrontation is an important question, I think, and NATO ministers should be discussing tomorrow. In the Mediterranean and Eastern Mediterranean particularly, NATO can apply the smart defense of cooperation, cooperative security with Mediterranean dialogue countries, partners, as well as members of Istanbul Cooperation Initiative for crisis management and power projection at the same time. So it's a microcosm of a variety of defense and security implementation of programs. When we are talking wider region of the South, and when we are talking about Istanbul Cooperation Initiative, there is a particular challenge there too. It touches both Saudi Arabia, it touches Iran, it touches Gulf region. In the Gulf region, we have seen recently an increased activity from Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and Oman collectively account about 70% of all the Gulf countries' defense expenditures. Yet they are outside, they are not partners in Istanbul Cooperation Initiative. So I think this is also a challenge that to bring these two countries into partnership with NATO in order to secure Gulf region as well. And also there is more complication there. In the Gulf Cooperation Council, the members, Arab countries, are discussing to create a unified military command and integrating Gulf Cooperation Council defense capabilities. So if this is going to happen, and if Saudi Arabia and Oman remains outside ICI, how are we going to cope with this idea? But I know that it's being discussed within the NATO circles and in this country, so this has to take priority also. NATO's role in Syria is also already mentioned, and I think it's quite important. Syria is a humanitarian disaster of increasingly growing proportions. Already about 4 million Syrians have fled the country to the neighboring countries, including Turkey. More than 300,000 people have died. About 6.5 million people are displaced within and outside the country. So this is a huge, huge crisis there. And part of it, of course, relates to Turkey, not only the hard security kind of spillover problem, but also as a refugee problem in Turkey. Up to 2 million Syrians are now living inside Turkey and having all sorts of problems for survival. Of course, NATO countries have deployed Patriot missiles to Turkey to show solidarity and to show that they are going to defend the NATO borders, which is important. But at the same time, these are symbolic. Very few of them are deployed and has created a number of discussions inside Turkey and outside Turkey. Inside Turkey, their capability are being questioned, whether they can defend the Turkish cities from ongoing missiles or they could defend only themselves. Outside Turkey, there was a discussion about the justification of their deployment, especially in the European countries. So this is not easy. It was not easy decision, I'm sure, in the NATO, but it was taken to just show the solidarity to defend a NATO country, and which is important, I think. NATO definitely has to protect its borders. If NATO cannot protect its borders, then it doesn't mean anything to anybody. So that includes Turkish borders. Another problem, do I have time? Or a couple of minutes? Let me, yeah. The bigger problem is, of course, how to deal with ISIS, or Islamic State. Its ability to hold territory, use of mix of terrorists and conventional tactics, recruit of thousands of fighters from all over the world, and makes it particularly a new and threatening a challenge for NATO countries and others also. It's a hybrid challenge, and it requires a hybrid response. It's very difficult for an organization like a NATO, a traditional security organization, to respond to this kind of a threat, because most of the threat coming from ISIS remains below the Article 5 type of threat. So it has to be discussed within the Article 4 connection, but then how to develop response is a big problem. NATO is a collective security organization, but in this case, it has to act differently than collective security organization. Waiting to take decisions in NATO's North Atlantic Council to react ISIS, which is a very fluid organization in a number of different countries, is very difficult and it's very challenging. A key problem is how to develop tactics to this kind of a hybrid crisis. And finally, let me also mention, and nobody has mentioned so far, that the problem of Iranian nuclear program. Although there was developments recently and the hopes have been raised, as to the fact that there might be a final agreement on this issue, but an agreement has not been reached yet. So what would happen if we cannot agree, the P5 cannot agree with Iran about its nuclear program? What will follow, whether the proliferation will follow or not? So these are kind of problems that we are just facing daily around the southern flank, and it's not only defending the Turkish border from the threat coming from Syria and possibly Iran. So let me stop here.